Welcome to episode 37 of Military Veterans Podcast, where we talk to veterans to learn about their stories and experiences. And today we're joined by Rob Campbell. Hey, Rob.
Hey, Gav. Good to be with you, man.
Thanks very much. Good to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Yeah, really excited about the conversation.
Nice. So am I. We're doing this one remotely once more. Well, I say once more. We've never met before, so this is brand new. But as for the show, we're doing another remote recording. But whereabouts are you in this world?
I'm in the state of Tennessee, in the eastern part of Tennessee, up in the Appalachian Mountains. Little town called Flag Pond, about 700 people here. So we should have no disturbances today.
Wow, 700 people. That's crazy.
It's tiny.
What's the weather then this time of year? Is it cold?
It's pretty mild. I mean, it is southern United States. You absolutely can get snow up here, but it's not known for long periods of cold. So you'll be up in this is all Fahrenheit. It'll be up in the you can get up into the 50s and 60s, and of course all the way down to the 20s and single digits. But the colder side of it usually doesn't last as long.
Right. Cool. Well, like I said, great to have you on the show. I'm really
Right.
excited to see or hear where this conversation goes. So, as all previous episodes, we go into 4 questions, which is the summary of what we're hopefully going to go into in the main episode. So, I'll give you these one at a time, Rob, and then we'll go into the heart of the show. So, the
Super.
first question is, when did you join the military?
I joined the U.S. Army in January of 1987. I was a freshman in college.
Nice, 1987. Wow. I'm not saying
Long
that's a long time ago. The second question was what's branch? So you said the U.S. Army, but what
Yeah.
branch inside that?
Yeah, I joined the U.S. Army Infantry. Later became a Ranger and a Paratrooper, but I stayed in the infantry my entire career.
Nice. And then how long did you serve for?
27 years and change. It was a long journey, but enjoyed every day. And yeah, it was a wonderful career. One of my best decisions.
Good. And then the last question is, what rank did you get to?
I made it to full colonel. So I got one over on the Army. They never caught up with me. I got all that rank and made it all the way to full colonel.
Fantastic. Well, you are the highest ranking person, I suppose, on this podcast
Nice.
to date. So yes, we've had a few majors on, but we've never had a colonel on. So that's
All
pretty
right,
cool.
we're making history today.
That's it. Well, Rob, let's rewind the clock. Where was you born, and where did you grow up?
I was born in Massachusetts, in New England, and born and raised there. I stayed there my whole life. Never traveled much. My dad was an insurance salesman, and just like his generation, worked 9 to 5, came home every day. Very predictable lifestyle. Wonderful upbringing. Had a great upbringing, and then went off to college like a lot of my peers, and that's where I found the Army. But yeah, that's where I was born and raised. My wife was the next town over. I married my high school sweetheart.
Nice. So what was school like for you? Did you enjoy it, or was it just something you had to do and get over with?
No, I did. I think, certainly my generation, at least the peers I hung around with in school, we were all kind of focused on college, going off to college. So it was kind of a path that was, I guess, somewhat expected. But I enjoyed the journey very much. I love academia. I've got 2 master's degrees. So, and I'm probably get a doctorate at some point because I just love learning from somebody, especially at the collegiate level, that has dedicated their life to a certain topic.
Wow.
Gobble it up. So college was great. It was a party school. There wasn't much to do out in Western Massachusetts. So we partied pretty hard, but I got a great education out of it. And that's where I discovered the Army as well. So it was a very good crucible in my life.
Okay, so you mentioned there about discovering the Army. So how does that work? How did you discover it whilst you were at college?
Yeah, it's a kind of a funny story. I mean, I'm not the like the post 9/11 generation that that signed up out of a sense of patriotism and wanted to, serve against an enemy. There wasn't anything going on. There were no wars happening in the 80s, and it was a very peaceful time. My dad had served in the Army Reserves, and so I had some exposure to it, but it was really out of money. And I mean, quite simply that. I was a college freshman, didn't have any money. The Army National Guard in Massachusetts was offering sign up bonuses and paying tuition for college. I was a very independent person. So what attracted me, and I thought, okay, this could be a nice part-time career, when I graduate college to have, that be a part-time soldier. And so that's what it was. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to do this. And I went off to basic training in summer of 87. And that's where I discovered, okay, I kind of like this. There's something here, I think, where wow, that this might be my passion. Not really clear at the time. The other thing that helped, Gavin, is I didn't make the basketball team. I was a basketball fanatic in high school. I played all the time, always had a ball in my hands, always playing. And I got to college. Of course, I didn't have any left hand. So when I got to college, that was a discriminator and I didn't make the team. And so, okay, there goes that passion. That came to a screeching halt. Now what? So it all kind of collided at the right time for me.
Okay. Just out of interest, how tall were you back then?
How what?
How tall were you?
I was 6 feet 2 inches. I
Okay,
hope I'm
okay.
still 6 feet 2 inches. I don't think I'm shrinking in my old age.
Okay, so it wasn't your height that kind of was against you.
No, no, I could dunk the ball actually. Not bad for a guy who's 6'2".
Nice, nice. Let's just before you do the signing up part, I suppose.
Yep,
You mentioned about your dad that used to be in the reserves. Did
right.
you get many like stories from him that kind of like sprinkled that enticement?
Yeah, I got a chance to go with him to drill weekends when he went. Not all the time, but he would bring me in sometimes, and so it was a neat exposure to see the military and be around all the equipment. And of course, he had a lot of military equipment back at home. And so I think it was just all that exposure and seeing it, a little closer than others might have, which really did it for me. But again, it wasn't something. I mean, if you'd asked me in high school if I was going to be a career Army officer, I would have laughed at you in the face. No way. I mean, it was the last thing on my mind. That said, I had some exposure to it because my dad would bring me in to drill weekends. And of course, I wanted to be like him. I was going to get a business degree and be a businessman like him. And this was just another thing that, I could do to be like my dad is join the
Mm.
reserves.
And was he an army infantryman? Was that
He was
his path?
actually a cavalryman. So that's, folks that are mounted soldiers, on tanks or vehicles. It's funny. I actually commanded units like that, cavalry units like that in my career. Um, so yeah, that was he wasn't an infantry guy, and he rose to the rank of staff sergeant, which he didn't really have a stellar career, but he served his time and got a retirement out of it, small retirement of 21 years.
That's still decent. That's still decent.
Yeah,
Well, I don't know if he wanted to come on, but you know. But your time in the army. So you sign up, and did you have to go to like a unit to sign up, or was there a careers office, or how did it look back in the 80s?
yeah. Interesting. Thinking back on that, I think I just probably went down to the local recruiter in North Adams, Massachusetts, where I was going to school, and just shared my interest in doing it. And of course, had long discussions with my dad about it because he obviously knew the process and he knew the army. And and he he asked me, "Is are you sure about this? Is this what you want to do?" And I was committed. So really, it was just about talking to a recruiter, and then you started the process. I think in January of '87, I went down and actually, got sworn in and went through the whole accessions process to make sure everything was good and health was good and all that stuff, and made it through there fine. I was an athlete, so I was in good shape, and yeah, and then that summer off to basic training,
Nice. Did you know you were going to be an officer? I mean, what did you join up as what did you we call
enlisted.
it an OR in this country, but
Yeah.
is it an E rank?
No, it was I signed up as an enlisted soldier. It was
Okay.
11 Bravo, which is infantry enlisted.
Okay.
Um, I really didn't have my eyes set on being an officer, but after I
Right.
came back from basic training and really dipped my toe in the pool and got a sense of, okay, this is kind of cool. ROTC, Reserve Officer Training Course, shows up at my campus. And okay, I'm kind of interested in this. So talked a bit more, but again, still focused on money, right? ROTC was another $150 a month. But of course, this wise officer said, hey, Rob, it's not about money, which eventually sunk in, right? But I liked it. And so I dove into ROTC, and that's where I got exposed to being an officer. And I think that I've always enjoyed leadership. And of course, being an Army officer was, the gold mine of leadership, the place to be if you wanted to be a leader.
Right. So if I get this correct, when you went off that summer to do a bit of basic training, that wasn't you fully enlisted into the military. You're still part of college. Is that right?
I am, yeah. So I was a part-time soldier. And
Okay.
so off the basic training, you go during the summer break in college, and then you come back and you do your drill weekends. And actually it was a split basic training was the design where if you go one summer and you go back the second summer to finish up the second half of it.
Wow.
Well, I never made it to the second half because I signed up to be a cadet, an ROTC cadet, and started my journey to become an officer.
Okay. So whilst you're going down that journey, are you still part of college, or once you make that step, you then are kind of like
Yeah,
fully
I
entitled then?
was. I only had to do 2 years of ROTC because I had joined the Army. I'd gone through basic training, which is the front end of ROTC training.
Uh-huh.
I had done all that because I had enlisted. So I had 2 years to do in college, and that's all full-time college. So I'm a full-time college student, and graduated in 1990. And at that point, when I graduated, I was trying to get on active duty, but I didn't out the gates. I had to kind of fight my way onto active duty. That's another story. Um, but yeah, it was just I was a part-time soldier until the point where I got assessed onto active duty. This is after I graduated college, where I started doing it full time.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Okay. Just getting my head around it. Sometimes
Yeah.
I need a bit of help. So thanks for that. So what was the main difference between doing that summer of like basic
Yep.
to the maybe the first aspect of the officer training? Would you call it officer
Yep.
training? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. What was the main difference? Was it more like thinking how to plan things as an officer, and then the
Sure.
other one was more like getting your feet running around?
Yeah, that's accurate. The first part of it is really okay. This is what it's like to be a soldier. These are our values. This is what the profession is like. This is the rank. This is the language. All the very basic foundational things of being a soldier. The second part of this is where you get into leadership and you're exposed to leadership opportunities where they put you in a scenario with people underneath you. Start to learn about leadership theory, the Army's definition of leadership. So it's more collegiate, I would say, on the second half of this when you become an Army officer, because you have to have a college degree to be an Army officer. The
Ah,
front
okay.
end of that was really the blocking and tackling, the very basics of here's how you wear the boots, here's how you tie them up.
Cool, cool. And so, yeah, how did you find? Let's talk about basic. You said you're an athlete, so did you find basic pretty easy for you?
Um, I wouldn't say easy. I mean, this was I went in the Georgia heat in the summer Georgia heat. It's humid and sleeping in a barracks with fans blowing. Old World War II barracks, really nostalgic. So it was challenging in that respect. And of course, I lost all my freedom. I was stripped of my individuality. And I confess, I was a little selfish going into the Army. It's kind of spoiled growing up. And so it was difficult from that standpoint. I wouldn't say it was physically difficult. I think I did okay because I was an athlete. I mean, I played basketball and, so I could run, I could do all those things that was required. So it wasn't as much a physical challenge. It was just more the mental demands and, and just being part of a team, having a sacrifice of yourself for the greater mission. That was
Yeah.
probably the challenge for me.
Okay. And then how did you find the beginning part of the officer training? Did you click with that quite quickly?
I think so. I found it fascinating. I was really, brand new to the Army. So, I mean, eyes wide open, really enamored with all these officers. There was a Vietnam veteran teaching us at ROTC in college. I mean, this guy's special forces, he had 11 Purple Hearts. I mean, this guy was
Whoa.
just, wow. I was just, so I was captivated by it. But I was really also, I think I took to leadership and the concepts of leadership and what you do and don't do. And I think that really sunk in, and I enjoyed those times where I was given that opportunity and where I learned. where I would not necessarily have had that before as a younger soldier. Eventually, I would have gotten there. We have this saying in the Army that you're a leader or you're a leader in training because eventually you're going to get up into that level. But ROTC kind of fast forwarded that a little bit and thrust me into those leadership positions, and I quickly kind of became a leader in my guard unit. Started doing some small things, and it was great. Really, really great experience for me.
That sounds good. That sounds good. So let's talk about you finishing college and
Yep,
I guess becoming a true officer. I mean, you are an officer, but you're then
yep.
moving into, you said about active duty. Is that when it was, is that the transition there? Or was there a bit of
It
time before
is.
you went to active duty?
Yeah, it is. I graduated in spring of 1990, and I'd been commissioned as an officer the year before, so I was wearing the rank, but I was just a guardsman. And even as a guard, you go off to your officer basic course, and that is to learn the basics of your branch, being an infantryman. That was at Fort Benning, Georgia, in the hot, Georgia sun. And so that was the transition point for me. And I had really, by that point, fallen in love with the Army, and I really wanted a career. I was eager to travel. My wife and I were, and all that went with it. I really wanted to get on active duty. But this is the early '90s, and they didn't need a lot of officers then. They were downsizing the Army, so I had to kind of fight my way. And I went through a board, competed against some others to get an active duty slot, and I won. And there it was, and the rest is history. I got selected for an active duty slot. I stayed there in the basic course, went off to Ranger training, and then went off to my first unit in Fort Lewis, Washington.
Okay, so with the ranger training, is that something that you have to do, or is that because of where you're going to get stationed?
It's not something you have to do, but it's kind of like an unwritten rule as an infantry officer that it's the doctorate, let's say, of the infantry, where it's the pinnacle of leadership training and education because it breaks you down. You get one meal a day, a couple hours of sleep a night, and it really, and then you're forced to lead under those conditions. And so it's the mountaintop, save for combat of leadership. And so those that decided not to do that were kind of looked upon like, okay, why wouldn't you want to be the very best you can be? Why wouldn't you select? So it was just always an automatic thing for me that, yeah, I was going to do that. And I wanted it. I mean, I looked up to these guys that had Ranger tabs and had gone through that training and come out the other end. And that was a mountain I wanted to climb.
Mm. Okay, so can we break down that a little bit? So ranger school, is that the correct
Yep.
terminology?
Correct.
Um,
Yep.
one, how long is it? And two, as an officer going there, are you still doing the same training course as the other ranks, or do they segregate you?
No, it's you're all the same. You strip off your rank, your name tag, everything. I mean, you are
Oh, cool.
just.
Okay.
I think all I had was my name tag in U.S. Army, and I had nothing on my uniform. And so we were all equals in that course. And of course, they begin to break you down. They test you physically, they test you mentally. They start to break your body down, with one meal a day and lack of sleep. And then they assign us leadership positions. Okay, Campbell, you're the patrol leader today. And then they watch us perform under those conditions.
Okay. And how long did you say that was?
It was about 100, I think it was 120 days. I think it's a little different now, but there were four phases in Ranger School when I joined. The first phase was Benning phase, they call it. It was Fort Benning, Georgia, and that's where you did the physical part of it and got integrated into the course. Went out and did some patrolling there in the Georgia woods, and then there was Mountain phase, which was northern Georgia. Then there was Florida phase in the Florida swamps, and then there was Desert phase out in Utah. Now they don't do Desert phase anymore. But yeah, that was the different phases, so you could lead and operate in different environments.
Okay. Oh, is there anything from that ranger school that stands out to you, like a task or a part of that training that you still remember today?
I think it was just having to push through under fatigue. Where you get that every now and then. You're just dead tired, right? It's middle of the night or it's a Friday afternoon or whatever it might be, and you've just done a lot and you're just physically and mentally exhausted. But you don't have any choice but to put through that and to push through that. And so I can remember several times where I really had to reach down and pull something out of me to say, okay, take the next step. step up and get moving here. And so I think it's probably a series of or a bunch of different moments like that in Ranger School that really pushed me, to step up and lead that have carried on since then, where I come across such scenarios and I'm able to drum up that motivation and that resilience, let's say, to push through something.
That's good to hear because I think a ranger regiment or ranger unit
Yep.
is becoming quite useful, quite pinnacle, and I suppose used worldwide because other countries are now creating those same units.
Yes.
Like in the UK,
Yep.
we've just created one. We think we call it the Ranger Unit,
Yep.
or Ranger Regiment. In fact, that's what we called it.
Oh wow.
And that only became or founded in December of 2021. So it's really new. But I think
Yeah.
the idea of what they do and how they are utilized is
Yep.
quite useful from the sounds of things for what we're going through in the world at the moment.
Yeah, it's very yeah, the Ranger Regiment is a special operations unit. I was never in the Ranger Regiment, but I was Ranger qualified and I served in infantry units that did very similar things. But the Rangers get called upon at short notice and they've all been vetted. I mean, these are top-notch soldiers and leaders, the cream of the
Hmm.
crop that they put into this special unit to do very difficult and dangerous missions. And so that's the core of it is going through that training and getting that patch you wear on your shoulder, which represents so much as
Yeah.
a gate to get into to units like that. I never tried to get into the Ranger Regiment. I had considered it a few times. It might have been an amazing experience, but I had an incredible career nonetheless.
Yeah. But you like you said, you wanted to challenge yourself to do that course, that school. So well done
Absolutely.
for doing that before you went off to your
You bet.
regiment or your unit. So
Yep.
where was it? Where did you go? You may have already mentioned it, but let's just say it again. Where you went to after you
Sure.
completed that school?
Yeah, my first duty assignment was out of Fort Lewis, Washington. So if you've ever been out to Seattle, Tacoma, Pacific Northwest, is where I went out, and I was an infantry platoon leader. It was the path that you travel. My first chance to actually lead real soldiers and be led by real officers outside of the schoolhouse. Now, really in the game, right on a real team. So that was my first assignment.
And what rank are you at this point?
I'm a second lieutenant, so the very lowest rank in the officer corps, and make second lieutenant. And I make first lieutenant shortly after I arrived, and then I'm in the rank of captain.
Okay. Well, how quickly did you do that?
So it's now remember I was commissioned as an officer a year before I graduated, so my clock was already ticking. Usually spend about 2 years as a second lieutenant, if I have the timeline right, and then another two as a first lieutenant. Before
Right.
you get looked at for a captain. So you're going to spend 4 years, up to five, perhaps, as a lieutenant, second lieutenant, first lieutenant, before you get picked up for captain. It goes pretty quick.
Okay. Yeah, I suppose if you're busy all the time as well, right? It's gonna fly by.
It
Um,
does.
Always a funny rank that because it's spelt lieutenant, but in the UK we say lieutenant.
Yes, you do. LIEU.
Yeah, but weird. I'm sure there's some history there of why it's pronounced that way, but hey,
I
I
think
don't
it's
know
just a different pronunciation. So I'm glad you brought that up because it is a different thing in the UK.
it. So your first unit, what did you do whilst you were there? Did you go away to do anything in particular, or did you pretty much spend most of your time there?
I spent most of the time there at that base. We did go off and do some training exercises. At other bases, like we went down to Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, which was a big Army training center at the time, for an exercise down there, kind of like a Super Bowl, if you will, in training, to go really test ourselves as soldiers. And so I did that, and then my unit moved from Fort Lewis, Washington, down to Fort Polk, Louisiana, down near about 5 hours from New Orleans. And so that was another kind of a pinnacle of my career. I stayed with the same unit; it just lifted up and moved to a new location. I spent a year there before I went back into training to become a captain and a company commander at the next level.
Right. Okay. What was that move like? Is it leaving all your kit and then you take over new kit, or did you have to move it?
No, we moved it. We took it with us, and There couldn't be a more opposite climate and I guess culture, if you will, moving from the Pacific Northwest to the deep South in Louisiana. Very different. I was not a huge fan of Fort Polk, Louisiana, but it wasn't the greatest base. They say that it's not hell, but you can see it from there. Just because there's nothing around it, and it's hot as like the blowholes of hell, and humid, and just and swampy. It's just a nasty place. Great for training, obviously, but it really, as I look back on those assignments, I did a year there. I guess I was fortunate in that respect. But it was the people I was around that really made the biggest impact on me that I enjoyed the most.
Okay. And just for timeline purposes, what time or year was this that you moved the unit down?
So this would have been, say, 93 to 94. So I get to Fort Lewis, Washington, 90, 91 time frame. First duty assignment, few years there. I'm a platoon leader. I move up to be an executive officer in a company and then move down to Fort Polk. I do another executive officer assignment. And then in 94, I go back to Fort Benning, to the schoolhouse, if you will, to learn how to be a captain and a company commander.
Okay. So what is that, another course or you actually get assigned there?
It's a requirement. You get
Okay.
assigned that. You don't compete for it. Everybody has to go through it. It's a gate, if you will, to get through before you go into that next rank and take those next assignments. And what it teaches you is how to be a company commander now, how to lead at that next level, and then also a bit of how to be a staff officer because you'll serve on a military staff and contribute in a variety of ways and a variety of assignments on a military staff. So it does that for you and kind of matures you and expands your thinking in terms of leadership and of course the size of the formation that you're leading too.
Yeah. Okay. I'm glad you mentioned that because I did want to ask, what kind of numbers are we talking? Because
Sure.
we get civilians listening to this podcast, which is great, but
Yep.
also not every enlistment person or OR like me, like a sergeant, might not know what all those numbers are, especially when it comes to US
Yeah.
sizes.
Yeah, absolutely. And very generally, it does vary between units and assignments. But your platoon level, which is the lowest level, is where you're a lieutenant. As a platoon leader, is going to be anywhere between 20 and 30 people, and you'll have some non-commissioned officers, some sergeants under you that run the sub elements of that organization. So you typically have 3 to 4 direct reports that report to you as a platoon leader. When you go up to company command level, now you're somewhere between 90 and 120 soldiers. So it gets bigger, and you've got now platoon leaders under you, officers for the first time that you're leading. That's the
Hmm.
next level of leadership. So between 20 and 30 at platoon level, between 90 and 120 at company command level.
Nice. And so, where do you go after Louisiana? If I said that right.
Yeah, you did. So I did a year at Fort Benning, learning to be a captain and a company commander, and then I went off to Hawaii after that.
Ooh.
Hardship
Okay.
tour. The
Okay.
Army said, "Hey, you got to go," and then but we loved it. We were there 5 years, and that's where I did my staff officer time and my company command time.
Right. Okay. So let me try and unpack this. So you go to
Yeah.
Hawaii. You don't fight the assignment. You just say okay,
Not at
and
all.
and you head over there. Was that the first time you've been to Hawaii?
No, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you remember I grew up in Massachusetts. I really never saw much of the world at all, and so this was a great exposure to kind of getting out of the continental United States, being in a place like that. I mean, it was wonderful, tropical and just incredible. But the unit itself was really great, and it's one of the bright spots on my career because I met some lifelong friends there, and I really grew and matured as an officer. Because I was this young, immature lieutenant that moved into the rank of captain, still very immature, still kind of new to the Army. And this is where I really matured and got a greater exposure to the bigger Army. That was a wonderful assignment.
Okay, and again, just for helping us with who's bad at maths. Roughly, what age are you when you're moving over to Hawaii as a captain?
Ooh, good question. I'm probably late 20s, 27, 28, I think.
Okay. So
Yeah.
I'm just really excited about Hawaii. So
Oh,
this is
man.
I'm going to keep this in, so it's exciting. It's
Yeah.
segregating slightly.
Let's just spend the
So,
rest of the episode on Hawaii.
well, so your episode, we're recording this in February. Your episode
Yeah,
goes out later in the year. I think it's
wonderful.
June, isn't it? Something like that. But I go away in March of 2023 to Hawaii for the first time,
Wow.
I'm super excited. So I don't mind having this in. But
Oh,
yeah, your 5 years there, your 5 years, like what stood out? You said you met some lifelong friends, but what stood out about being there? Yeah, what can you share?
yeah, a couple things. I mean, the climate is I think it's the world's best climate, because you could literally be in shorts and a t-shirt year round. I mean, it's absolutely wonderful. The temperature is always great, and the terrain's rugged too. And I think for me, what sticks out, two things. I think it's the challenge of the assignments that I had and the learning that occurred, and then also the people that I served with. I was in a unit, I was a battalion, so that's about 700 men. I didn't lead that. I was a staff officer in that organization. And the people there with me, my peers there, many of them went on to gain, great rank and get on, really great assignments and have amazing careers. So I mean, it just spoke to the caliber of people that I was around and got to learn from. And of course, the training was rigorous and tough, and we were very physically fit because he was always outside and climbing steep mountains and training in the rugged jungles out there. It was really, really an incredible assignment. Then, of course, the lifestyle part of it, after work was done, there's this spirit in Hawaii of, enjoy life, enjoy work, because you're in such a wonderful place, and to not take advantage of that is a real shame. So we embraced all of it, going to the beach, hiking there, all the culture and the food and the sights and the sounds and the tourism and everything.
Okay, that's exciting. And so
Wonderful.
I'll ask something else about Hawaii in a moment, but you mentioned a few times about going over as a staff officer, and then you mentioned about like 700 uh, kind of in some ways under your command, right? You're kind of guiding them. So how
Yep.
does that work? Being a staff officer, how did you explain that to people?
Yeah, so in a battalion of about 700 people, anywhere between 400 and 700 people is a battalion or a squadron. They're called both. I was in an infantry battalion of about 700 people, and you have a lieutenant colonel at that at the top of that. So that's several ranks removed from where I'm at. This is a person who's probably done 16 years or so in the army, and he or she has a staff underneath them of different people, S1 through S whatever. And the S means, staff position. So S1 is personnel, S2 is intelligence, S3 is operations, S4 is logistics, and it goes on from there. My first assignment out in Hawaii, I was an S4, so I was a logistics officer for a battalion. And so what I do is I help plan logistics to, sustain that organization with beans and bullets and everything else. And I report to the battalion commander and support his plan to help this thing go forward logistically. So I did that for, I think, gosh, 2 years maybe. And then I moved over to be an S1, the personnel officer in that same battalion. So I spent a long time on staff, and it really helped me mature and see an organization from a greater perspective. And these are all things that, as infantry officers, as artillery officers, as engineer officers, we will do from time to time in the Army, is to be that personnel officer or be that logistics officer or be that operations officer. And so that's what that staff time meant. And that was a typical progression where you go in after your training to be a captain and a company commander, you do some staff time, and then you get selected for a command, which happened out in Hawaii.
Okay, so say that last bit again. What command?
So, company command, and this is
Company
again that,
command.
that 90 to 120 people.
Right, right,
And
right.
that's the goal, right? I mean, that's what you want. That's the real ticket punch, if you will, or the hallmark of your military career as an officer is company command. Because that's where the Army really looks at you. Can this person lead? How well do they perform in that assignment? And you prep a long time and think a lot about, company command, and you go off and do it. So I had two chances to do that. I had the first company was a headquarters company in an infantry brigade, and it kind of was the home for all of the staff elements that lived there. The headquarters company kind of keeps all that and cares for all those people that go out and serve the organization, mostly in staff roles. And then I was a long range surveillance detachment commander, And that was a pretty elite assignment. You're on jump status, which means you're parachuting out of airplanes, because the surveillance detachment is designed to go way out behind enemy lines and get in and dig up intel and report back to the division commander. So they select some very elite people, if you will, for that assignment. So I was amazed and privileged to be assigned for that, and that was my second opportunity to command. Which
Right.
both of those were very very incredible experiences for me.
Okay. Were both of those on Hawaii, or were
Mhm.
they were as well? Okay,
They
cool. I'm
were.
just like
Yep.
piecing it all together.
Sure.
Nice, nice. And then so whilst you were out there, do you typically stay on one island, or are you jumping between a few?
The only one you typically go to is the Big Island. So we were on the island of Oahu, which is where the capital is, Honolulu. And the Big Island of Hawaii, that's got both the volcanoes out there. Well, there's this big training area called Pahakaloa Training Area, and it's up, gosh, 8,000 feet or so. And so it's a big area where you can go out and maneuver a large organization in different places, and the terrain's very rough. So we would fly over there to do some training every now and then. And then, of course, when you're out in the Pacific, you're doing a lot of training with other nations. So we did some training with Japan. We would go over to Korea. We would go to Thailand. We did a tour in Australia, trained with the Australian military. So it was all fantastic experiences for me as a young officer.
Yeah. So you actually go and see other parts of the world whilst you're out there doing the
Yeah.
training. That sounds
You
pretty cool.
do. Yeah, the Pacific is like that, where you don't necessarily sit still much because of our presence in the Pacific. It's such a vast area. And we want these partnerships. We want to be able to train and fight together. So you'll spend
Yeah,
time in these other countries like Thailand, Japan, Korea, you name it.
that's cool. Do you invite them over to Hawaii as well, or
We
you
do.
just go
Yeah.
to
We
them?
do
Yeah,
exchange programs. They'll come in and train with us. We had an Australian rifle company, about 100 men, come train with us while I was there. It was just wonderful experiences to share lessons and train and operate with each other.
yeah. I mean, I'm like I say, I'm really excited to go and see it myself because
Should be.
I guess that I'm not going to say what I'm going to say because that would make me sound really dumb. But I guess you think of it as quite a small island, but it's probably bigger than what you're imagining.
Yeah, I didn't feel isolated there. I mean, you're not going to travel state to state, on an island, but there was enough to see and do that I never really felt isolated. And oh gosh, it was wonderful. I think you might need to take me along on this trip, Gab. You might need an assistant.
Well, I'll give you the dates after we finish the recording, and we'll see what we can do.
Sounds good, man.
Brilliant. So you complete your 5-ish years in Hawaii,
Yep,
and then you sadly have to go back to mainland, right? So
kicking and screaming.
so where do you head off? And are you still a captain at this point?
I am. It was a very pivotal moment in my career because this is where I say you become a professional. And gosh, we could get into that topic by itself. But when you're kind of an apprentice in the few years, the early years in the army as an officer, and you become a journeyman when you make that leap. From really, I think senior captain is now when you've been in the institution enough and you now have a real true sense of its values and its purpose and all of those things and you have a greater understanding of what's happening on high at the highest levels of the military, and that's really where you make that leap to become a professional. So I had a wonderful opportunity that fell in my lap when I was transitioning out of company command to my next assignment to be the aide for a general, an aide-de-camp for a general, and that is his or her personal assistant. And the commander of the 25th Infantry Division, which was the division I was in Hawaii, was going to Fort Lewis, Washington, back to where I had started my career to be the three-star general commander of First Corps in Fort Lewis, Washington. And he needed an aide de camp for that position. And I applied for it and competed for it and got selected for it. And man, an amazing opportunity to widen my aperture now and see the Army from the very top. From
Mm,
an executive that had been in the military several decades, was a Vietnam veteran, and I was an aide for him for 2 years, and that took me back to Fort Lewis, Washington, where we stayed for about 2.5 years. And while I was there, I got promoted to the rank of major, made that next leap, and got ready for my next course Command and General Staff College, which prepared me to be a major and a field grade officer in the rest of my career. So picked up for an aide-de-camp in Hawaii, moved with him to Fort Lewis, Washington, and then spent 2 years with him, traveling all over and learning and watching him operate.
Wow, that's really cool. So when you were with him for 2 years, you mentioned like going around the world. Did you go to any any combat zones, or was it a case of going to different countries and doing other things?
Yeah, no, there were no wars going on at this time. So this is 1998. Of course, 9/11 happens just after I left being the aide. But of course, before that time, there really isn't any wars going on. But we go out and see a lot of training exercises. Fort Lewis has some missions in the Pacific, so we're kind of back in the Pacific a lot. A lot of time in Korea, Japan, a little bit in Thailand, and then of course to our headquarters in Georgia at the time, U.S. Army Forces Command, and then the Pentagon quite often. So for me as a young officer, it was just a tremendous experience.
Okay. And so yeah, you mentioned 9/11. So it sounds like this is around the time that you
It
become
is.
major. Is that right? And head off.
Yeah, I was picked up for major right before 9/11, so I was wearing the rank already, and I was serving out another assignment there at Fort Lewis before I went off to Command General Staff College, um,
Right.
and so that's when 9/11 happened.
Whilst you're at the staff college.
Yeah, no, I was actually still at Fort Lewis. I was
Oh,
actually
okay.
traveling when 9/11 happened. I was in Arkansas at a training conference, and we had these big wide screens up with PowerPoint slides on them going through some briefing, and then they switched over to the live TV feed, and that's where we saw the airplanes crash into the or fly into the twin towers. And so yeah, there I was, just a major sitting there in a training briefing. I'm like, oh my god, the world's just changed.
Yeah, massively. Yeah.
Yep,
I think everybody, especially in service at that point, can remember where they were. You
absolutely.
know, I was out in Oman, so I
Oh
was on
yeah, wow,
big British exercise out there, and
wow.
we all thought it was a big movie, but no, clearly not. So,
Yep.
I mean, from that point, from that moment, you're still working for the general. I'm guessing things changed quite drastically there before you head off.
They
Um,
did. I was in a training unit that spent its time training the Guard and Reserve of the military because they obviously don't get as much training as the active duty does. So these units were stood up to assist them and kind of speed up their preparedness for combat should they ever get called to go to war. That was a short stint, and then I quickly went off to Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, where you go as a major to learn how to be a field grade officer and a general officer's staff. And so the war had kicked off just before I got there, and that year I spent at Leavenworth was the first year of the war in Iraq.
right. So that training is a year long. Is that right?
It is. Yeah, you
Wow.
move there with
Okay.
your family, and it's collegiate level education and training on how to be a general officer staff, how to operate at a higher level, how to to see with a bigger aperture. Because as a field grade officer, the rank of major, lieutenant colonel, and colonel. So you got company grade, lieutenant and captain, field grade, major, lieutenant colonel, and colonel, and then general officers, all the stars. Field grade is the reason it's called field grade is you see the field now. You're
Right.
not looking at what's right in front of you, and so it's not a very tactical, point to point in person leadership. You're more up a level on a bigger scale, where it's more about communicating and directing and jumping in every now and then to coach, teach, and mentor people. And so
Okay.
that's what it trains you to do.
Yeah. And how did you find that? Because obviously you've been in for a while at that point, and you've learned all the stuff that you have in your time. So
Mhm.
taking that next step up, that next step back, and seeing it from, like you say, a bigger aperture,
Yeah.
was it quite enticing for you?
It was. I mean, I embrace academics. I love learning and
Mm.
training, and I actually got a civilian master's degree while I was there. I've been known to bite off more than I can chew, but so it was kind of a double school, if you will. But it was very eye opening for me. Not only from the curriculum, which was good, it wasn't great, but the peers I was with, the people that were around, because the pyramid starts to form now, where not everybody is going to make the ranks as you go up, and people start to fall off now. I mean, there's more lieutenants than you need, majors, and all that. So now it's starting to narrow a little bit, and you're in a smaller group of people. So it's a great year of learning and growth for me.
Okay. Um, you mentioned about people falling off. Did you ever feel that that might happen to you, or was you quite strong in yourself with moving forward in that?
Yeah, I don't recall that there was ever really a threat to my career, meaning the Army was just going to cut personnel and I might have been on the chopping block. I had done well. I mean, I had done well in company command. I'd been a general's aide, so I've been kind of thrusted into the upper levels in a smaller circle of people that had done those things. Because general's aides typically go on to do great things in the military. And so I knew that. I saw that, all these senior officers had spent time with two company commands, had been a general's aide, had done the things that I had. So I always felt that I was pretty competitive in that respect. So I never really had a threat. And there are some that self-select, they just don't necessarily want to be a major. They do their company command. Okay, I'm happy. This is all I wanted to do. And they move on. So there's a lot of that happens too. And there's some that just don't make it. Like you had to get selected for command general staff college. It's not something that's just automatic. And so I did. I was competitive enough to get selected. So again, that's kind of that one of the first cuts that happens at that level where if you don't make it, you can stay in, but you're not going to be as competitive as others, if that
Okay.
makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so when this was maybe coming to the end of your year there, are
hmm
they giving you options to where to go next?
Yeah. From that point, if you're in the combat arms, you're typically going to go off to be an operations officer. Again, on that staff I explained earlier, that S3 position, the operations officer is a major. The rest of us are captains because that position is so important. Or you'll be an executive officer for a battalion. Again, 400 to 700 people. You've got a lieutenant colonel, and then the next rank down are two majors, an executive officer and an operations officer. So that's where you spend a lot of your time at Fort Leavenworth learning how to, getting a sense of how to do those things. And that is the next hallmark assignment, the next block check, if you will, or feather in your cap that has to be done for you to travel on to your career. So while while you're at Fort Leavenworth in the Command General Staff College, they'll come out from all the divisions, the infantry divisions across the Army, and they'll interview majors that they want to pick for their team. So it's kind of like the NFL draft, if you will. Well, I got selected to go to the 82nd Airborne Division, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Um, and wow, what an experience that was. And so that was the next assignment for me. And we did 5 years there as a major. And that's where I got promoted to my next rank and moved on.
Okay. So airborne, that's the
Yes.
next place. I
Yep.
think you mentioned about airborne earlier in your career, did you?
I
And
did, and
and
that surveillance detachment I was a part of it was on jump status, we call it. They were airborne slots. You had to be because you had to, it was part of the mission to jump out of airplanes. And of course, the 82nd Airborne Division is an airborne division, so everybody has to be, parachute qualified there. And so I was back in the airborne community again.
yeah, I was going to say, so in your first one from earlier, had you been on the jumps course and done all of that? You had done all that, yeah? Okay.
Yeah, I had done the jump course actually as an ROTC cadet in my training. You get an
Really?
opportunity, yeah, to go
Wow.
through jump training. A lot of they give that opportunity to a lot of younger officers to get them a chance, to get that qualification. So I had done that years ago, and then I started jumping as a company commander. But really, the Super Bowl or the real pinnacle of an airborne unit are units like the 82nd Airborne Division. So there I was.
Yeah. So when you got there, I mean, a lot of people know and have heard of the 82nd. Um, you being told you're going there, you being
Uh,
selected through the draft. Was you a little bit nervous, or was you like really eager and ready to go?
I was nervous, and that's probably an understatement because they call it the airborne mafia, and it's like this community of people that return to the 82nd Airborne Division and keep coming back, and they've got skin in the game and they know everybody. Well, I was brand new to the 82nd, and I was coming in at a rank major, kind of that mid-level officer rank. So it was a stretch for me. It was a challenge for me. And I wasn't jump master qualified, which means you're trained to put people out of an aircraft, to stand them up, get them all hooked up, and let them parachute out of an aircraft. So I had not been through that training, and I needed to do that. So all of these things were obstacles in the way of me succeeding in the 82nd Airborne Division. And then, of course, there were people that had done it before me that knew and were all, had that qualification. So it represented a big challenge for me to break into the mafia, if you will, and be a
Mm.
part of that.
So you had to go off and do your next level parachuting course.
I did.
Would that be
Yeah.
okay to call it that?
Yeah.
So how was that going there as a major, and
Oh,
how did you do
God.
that course?
So it sucked the life out of me, Gav. There's a pump at
Oh.
the front gate when you drive on the base every day. They suck the life out of you. And I'm joking, but I mean, it's a tough assignment for anybody as wearing the rank of major in the Army. They call them Iron Majors because it's such a difficult assignment because you're not necessarily in charge of anything, but you're running everything. I mean, any operation, anything that goes down, you're the person that's putting that plan together and seeing it through. And there's all kinds of friction with schedules and you name it, and it comes into the prey. And you're so busy, you're so consumed during those years. And that was, and then of course, put me in the 82nd Airborne Division, which is moving at warp speed. All of that presented a massive challenge for me. But it hardened me. It prepared me for difficult assignments, clearly combat. And that's where I got my first exposure to combat. But yeah, that was a tough assignment to have to go through that next level of parachute training because it's a difficult course. And but I did. I went through it. But I knew I was so focused when I went through that course because I knew I only had one shot at it.
Yeah, yeah.
You did not want to fail that, especially as a major. So I got through the first time, and that was good. And so yeah, I met all the gates and did all the things I was supposed to do in the 82nd Airborne Division.
Okay. So just to remind us, what's the name of that course that you had to do?
That's the U.S. Army Jump Masters course. So you
Jump
got the
Masters
jump
course.
course, which is learning how to parachute. How you actually, put the chute on and get inspected, and actually what your actions are as you jump out of an aircraft and how you land. Jump Master is the person that leads that operation, administers all of that. So you've got to understand now how the operation occurs on an operational level. So it's a next level up, and you only go through that if you're in a jump unit.
Okay.
And
Okay.
82nd Airborne Division, it was a requirement. I needed to be jump
Yeah.
master qualified.
And so I'm hoping my maths is good here. So if I've got my maths right, you've been in for about 15 years at this point.
Yeah, I think you're right.
2002?
It was probably 12 years or so. So right around that mark. Yeah,
Yeah. So you must be in your 30s, early 30s.
I am. Yeah,
Yep.
early to mid 30s. I turned 40 when I was in the 82nd Airborne Division. So I was, and of course I was there 5 years. So I was mid to late 30s by the time I got
Mid
there.
to late 30s. Okay. So doing that big jumps course in your mid 30s. That's good going, right?
Whew. It wasn't as physically demanding. It was just really mentally demanding because it was a very detailed thing. I mean, really, right down to the Nat's detail of inspecting someone wearing a parachute. Because one thing goes wrong, it could be catastrophic. So,
Mm.
very demanding in that respect.